Part 1, The Last Flight. Ash had lived for 10,000 years. That's a number most beings couldn't even imagine. He'd watched stars be born and die. He'd seen empires rise from nothing and crumble to dust. And through it all, he'd been a force of nature, unstoppable, unbeatable, unbreakable. But time catches up with everyone. Even dragons. His scales, once bright crimson like fresh blood, had faded to the color of old ash. That's where his name came from now. Not the fire he breathed, but what remained after the fire died. His wings, massive leather sheets that used to blot out suns and cast shadows over entire cities, now trembled when he flew. Each beat sent pain shooting through muscles that had finally grown tired. The dragon species had ruled the galaxy longer than most civilizations had existed. They were the ultimate predators, 7-foot claws that could tear through starship hulls, scales harder than reinforced steel, breath hot enough to melt titanium. They didn't negotiate. They didn't compromise. They conquered. And Ash had been the best of them all. The greatest warrior. The most feared general. Mothers on 100 worlds whispered his name to make their children behave. Be good, or Deathwing will come for you. Deathwing. That's what they'd called him. He'd earned it. But the Dragon Honor Code was absolute. When a warrior could no longer fight, when age finally claimed their strength, they had one final duty. Fly into the void. Die alone among the stars. No ceremony. No witnesses. Just silence and dignity in death. Ash had accepted his fate. He'd lived longer than he deserved anyway. The things he'd done, the worlds he'd burned, the lives he'd taken, maybe this lonely death was mercy. But even in death, his pride remained. He wouldn't die just anywhere. He chose a forgotten moon on the edge of human territory. A deliberate insult to his own kind. He would die on land belonging to the weakest species in the entire Galactic Council. Humans. Those soft, fragile little creatures with no natural weapons. No claws to rip with. No scales to protect them. No venom to paralyze their enemies. No fire to burn. They were pink and squishy and died if you looked at them wrong. They needed machines to travel between stars, needed suits to survive in space, needed weapons because their own bodies were useless in a real fight. They'd barely survived their own primitive wars on their home planet. While dragons were conquering solar systems, humans were still hitting each other with sticks and rocks. Even now, with their crude ships and basic technology, they were considered a joke by most of the galaxy. The only reason they had a seat on the council was because the other species felt sorry for them. Dying on human land felt fitting somehow. A final insult to himself, maybe. Or perhaps a statement that he'd fallen so far that he belonged with the weakest of the weak. The moon was barren and cold. Old battlefield scars marked the landscape, craters from plasma bombs, twisted metal from crashed ships, scorch marks that would never fade. This place had seen war between dragons and humans 5 years ago. It had lasted about 6 minutes. That's how badly the humans had lost. Ash found a flat area near some ruins and settled down. His body was shutting down already. He could feel it. The cold creeping into his bones despite the fire inside him. His heart slowing. His breath becoming shallow. This was it. The end of 10,000 years. Soon, he'd be just another fossil waiting to be dug up by some future archaeologist. He closed his eyes and began the death meditation. Clearing his mind. Accepting the void. Waiting for the darkness to take him. That's when he heard them. Footsteps. Small ones, crunching on the rocky ground. Ash's eyes snapped open. Every instinct screamed at him to see what was approaching. After 10,000 years as a predator, you don't ignore footsteps. A human child walked toward him. A little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Small even for his species. Wearing worn clothes that had been patched several times. His brown hair was messy, his face smudged with dirt. But his eyes, those human eyes, showed no fear. The boy should have run. Any creature with survival instincts would have. Ash was still a dragon, still massive, still deadly even in his dying state. One swipe of his claw could end this child instantly. But the boy didn't run. He walked right up to Ash and stopped just a few feet away, studying the dragon like he was examining an interesting rock. Then the child did something that Ash, in 10,000 years of life, had never experienced. The boy reached out his small, soft hand and gently touched Ash's foreclaw. The sensation that flooded through the dragon's body was impossible to describe. It wasn't heat, though Ash had known plenty of heat in his life. It wasn't pain, though he'd known plenty of that too. It was warmth, but different. It flowed through the neural connections in his scales, lighting up pathways that hadn't activated in centuries. It was something his species had forgotten existed. Something they'd deliberately left behind in their evolution toward ultimate power. It was connection. Simple, pure, genuine connection between two living beings. And in that moment, everything Ash thought he knew about strength and weakness began to crack apart. Part 2. The Boy Who Wasn't Afraid. Tommy was 8 years old and lived in the frontier colony with his grandmother Grace. The colony wasn't much, just a collection of prefab shelters, a water recycling plant, and a greenhouse that barely grew enough vegetables to feed everyone. It sat on the edge of nowhere, on a moon that nobody wanted and nobody visited. Most of the settlers avoided the old battlefield ruins. Too many bad memories. Too many ghosts. The twisted metal and scorched earth reminded them of what they'd lost during the war. Parents told their children to stay away, that it was dangerous, that unexploded ordnance might still be buried in the soil. But Tommy went there almost every day. He had his reasons. 3 years ago, the dragons had attacked Arcturus Station. Tommy's parents had been there, working as engineers on the orbital platform. He'd been staying with Grandma Grace on the colony for the summer. He was supposed to go back to his parents in 2 weeks. He never saw them again. The dragons destroyed the station in minutes. 600 people died that day. Tommy's mom and dad were just 2 names on a very long list. 2 more casualties in a war that humanity was losing badly. After that, something inside Tommy had broken. Or maybe it had hardened. He wasn't sure which. But he knew he didn't feel fear anymore. What was left to be afraid of? The worst thing that could happen to him already had. So when he saw the massive shape land near the ruins that morning, something made him walk toward it instead of away. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. Maybe when you've lost everything, you stop caring about danger. As Tommy got closer, he recognized what he was looking at. A dragon. Ancient, by the looks of it. Its scales were dull gray, its movements slow and painful. It looked like it was dying. Tommy had seen plenty of pictures of dragons. He'd studied them obsessively after his parents died. He knew their species, their weapons, their tactics. He knew which one had destroyed Arcturus Station. This one. This exact dragon. He recognized the scar pattern on its left wing. The slightly crooked horn. The way one eye was slightly more closed than the other. Deathwing. The most feared dragon in the entire fleet. The one who'd personally led the attack that killed 600 people. Including Tommy's parents. The dragon's eyes opened and focused on him. Even dying, even weak, those eyes held power. Ancient power. The kind that made you want to run even when logic said you shouldn't. You should run, child, the dragon rumbled. Its voice was weak but still carried weight, like distant thunder. I am the one they call Deathwing. I have burned worlds. Tommy didn't run. Instead, he sat down in the red dust beside the creature, cross-legged like he was settling in for story time at school. He pulled out his worn tablet, the screen was cracked but it still worked, and scrolled through old news footage until he found what he wanted. I know who you are, Tommy said quietly. He held up the tablet, showing grainy footage of the attack on Arcturus Station. Explosions. Fire. Ships breaking apart. And there, in the center of it all, a crimson dragon breathing destruction. You killed my mom and dad at Arcturus Station. That's you, right? The dragon stared at the screen. Something flickered in those ancient eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. When you've destroyed as many things as this dragon had, maybe they all blurred together after a while. Tommy expected to feel anger saying those words out loud. Hatred. The burning desire for revenge that everyone kept telling him was natural and okay. Counselors at the colony said it was part of grief, that wanting revenge was normal, that he shouldn't feel guilty about those feelings. But sitting here next to this dying creature, Tommy didn't feel anger. He just felt tired. And sad. And confused about why everything had to be the way it was. The dragon looked like it was expecting something too. Probably expecting Tommy to scream at it, or cry, or maybe try to hurt it somehow. That's what most beings did when they met the one who destroyed their family. The dragon's body tensed, ready for whatever human rage was about to come. Instead, Tommy looked at the dragon's cracked scales, at the way its breathing sounded painful and raspy, at how it trembled from cold even though it was a creature of fire. Are you thirsty? Tommy asked. You look really tired. The dragon's eyes went wide. For a creature that had lived 10,000 years, that had seen every possible reaction from every possible species, this seemed to be something completely new. Something it had never experienced before. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Tommy shrugged. It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Or maybe it was a complicated question with a simple answer. He wasn't always sure which was which anymore. Grandma Grace says that hate is like carrying hot coals around, Tommy explained, repeating the words his grandmother told him whenever he had nightmares about the attack. You think you're gonna throw them at someone else, but really they're just burning your own hands. She says it only hurts the person carrying them. The dragon stared at him. This creature that had literally breathed fire for 10,000 years, that had turned entire cities to ash, that had burned worlds until nothing lived, it looked completely speechless. For the first time since his parents died, Tommy felt something other than emptiness. He wasn't sure what it was yet. But it was something. And something was better than nothing. He stood up and brushed dust off his pants. I'll be back with water. Don't go anywhere. The dragon didn't answer. It just kept staring as Tommy walked away, like it was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make any sense. Part 3, What Dragons Forgot. The first day, Tommy brought water in an old plastic container. It leaked a little from a crack in the side, but it was enough. Ash drank, and the cool liquid felt strange going down his throat. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him anything. Usually, beings just gave him whatever he demanded out of fear. This was different. This was given freely. The second day, Tommy brought food. Not for himself, for Ash. Dried meat from the colony's ration supplies. It wasn't much, probably taken from the boy's own meals, but he offered it anyway. Ash didn't need much food anymore. His body was shutting down. But he ate it because refusing felt wrong somehow. The third day, Tommy just brought himself and started talking. And that's how the pattern began. Every morning, as the sun rose over the barren moon, Tommy would make the 20-minute walk from the colony to the ruins. He'd sit down next to this massive creature that had killed his parents, and he'd just talk. He talked about school. How his teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was always giving too much homework. How the other kids in his class were learning about Earth history, about the old countries that didn't exist anymore, about how humans almost destroyed themselves before they finally learned to work together. He talked about how hard it was to learn math, but how he liked reading stories about explorers and adventurers. He talked about his grandmother Grace. How she made the best cornbread in the colony, even though the corn they grew in the greenhouse never tasted quite right. How she sang old songs while she cooked, songs from Earth that had been passed down through generations. How she never cried when she thought Tommy was watching, but sometimes he'd hear her at night, soft sobs coming from her room. He talked about human movies he'd watched on his cracked tablet. Adventures in space, stories about heroes and villains, comedies that made him laugh, sad stories that made him cry. He tried to explain the plots, but he got details mixed up and had to backtrack and clarify things. Ash found himself following along anyway, asking questions. And then Tommy would ask Ash questions. At first, the dragon didn't answer. What was the point? He was dying. Nothing he said mattered anymore. But Tommy kept asking. And slowly, Ash started talking back. He told Tommy about things he'd never shared with anyone. Ancient memories from when he was young, which was thousands of years ago, so long that most of it felt like someone else's life. He talked about dragon history, about the old days before the conquest, before the empire. We weren't always like this, Ash said one afternoon, his voice rough. Thousands of years ago, before we became what we are now, dragons were different. Tommy leaned forward, interested. Different how? We had something called soul fire. The word felt strange in Ash's mouth. He hadn't spoken it in centuries. Most young dragons didn't even know the word existed. It was a bond between dragons. A connection deeper than words. When two dragons formed soulfire, they could feel each other's emotions, share thoughts, understand each other completely. That sounds beautiful, Tommy said. Ash made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. We thought it was weakness. As we evolved, as we became stronger and more powerful, our leaders decided soulfire made us vulnerable. If you care about someone, they can be used against you. If you love someone, their death can break you. If you connect with someone, you can be hurt. So what happened? We bred it out. The words tasted like ash in Ash's mouth. Appropriate, given his name. Over generations, we selected for dragons who couldn't form bonds. We made it a genetic weakness, something to be eliminated. We chose power over connection. Strength over emotion. Victory over everything else. Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this. His young face was thoughtful, serious in a way that no 8-year-old should have to be. But then, Tommy had lost his parents. He'd grown up fast. Connection makes you vulnerable, Ash continued. That's what we told ourselves. That's what we believed. And it's true, in a way. Caring about someone means they can hurt you. Loving someone means losing them will destroy you. So we decided not to care. Not to love. Not to connect. We chose to be alone, and we called it strength. Tommy frowned. His eyebrows scrunched together the way they did when he was thinking hard about something. But being alone sounds sad. The word hit Ash like a physical blow. Sad. He tested the word in his mouth. It felt foreign. Strange. Dragons had words for many things. They had 17 different words for types of victory in battle. They had 12 words for different kinds of rage. They had words for honor, duty, conquest, defeat, glory, and vengeance. But they didn't have a word for sad. Not in their language. Not in their culture. Sadness implied missing something, wanting something you didn't have, feeling incomplete. Dragons were taught from hatching that they were complete unto themselves. They needed nothing. No one. They were perfect predators, perfect warriors, perfect and alone. We don't have that word, Ash finally said. Not in dragon language. Tommy looked genuinely shocked. You don't have a word for being sad? But, everyone feels sad sometimes. When you lose something important. When someone leaves. When things don't work out the way you hoped. How do you describe that feeling? We don't. The admission felt heavier than it should. If a dragon feels that way, they ignore it. Push it down. Consider it weakness. That's terrible, Tommy said softly. And maybe it was. Ash had never thought about it before. But sitting here, talking to this small human child who had every reason to hate him but instead brought him water and food and stories, Ash felt something he couldn't name in his own language but recognized in Tommy's. When Tommy reached out and touched his scales, something the boy did casually now, without fear, Ash felt the old pathways lighting up inside him. The ancient soul-fire connections that had been dormant for millennia. This human child, with his simple kindness and his offered friendship, was awakening something that dragons had spent thousands of years trying to kill. And impossibly, Ash's body was responding. His scales were brighter today than yesterday. His breathing was deeper, stronger. The pain in his wings had lessened. The connection wasn't just emotional. It was physical. It was real. It was healing him in ways that made no scientific sense. For the first time in 10,000 years, Ash realized his species might have been wrong about everything. Part 4, The Choice. Ash woke to the sound that every dragon recognized instantly, the deep thrumming of wings cutting through atmosphere. Not just one set of wings. Multiple. Coming fast. Dragon High Command had found him. His biological signs must have registered on their long-range scanners. Dragons didn't just recover from death preparation. It was supposed to be a one-way journey. When a dragon began shutting down, they stayed shut down. But Ash's heart was beating stronger now. His body temperature had risen. His neural activity had spiked. To the High Command, this meant one thing: he was defying the honor code. Tommy was sitting beside him, reading aloud from a story on his tablet about some human explorer discovering a new planet. The boy looked up at the sound, squinting at the sky. What's that noise? Trouble, Ash said quietly. He tried to stand, and for the first time in weeks, his legs actually supported his full weight. His wings spread partially, testing their strength. Still weak, but functional. Tommy, you need to go. Now. Run back to the colony. Why? What's happening? My people are coming. They're coming to make sure I die properly. Ash looked down at the boy. They won't care that you're here. To them, you're nothing. Less than nothing. Tommy stood up, but he didn't run. Instead, he moved closer to Ash, standing right next to the dragon's front leg. Then I'll tell them to leave you alone. Tommy. You're my friend. I'm not leaving. Before Ash could argue, they landed. 7 dragons descended from the sky in perfect formation, their wings creating dust storms as they touched down. They were young, strong, their scales gleaming with health and power. Warriors in their prime. Leading them was Drake. Ash recognized him immediately. He'd trained this one himself, 200 years ago. Taught him everything about combat, strategy, honor. Drake had been his best student. His scales were deep blue, his eyes sharp and intelligent. Drake's expression shifted from mission focus to complete shock when he saw Ash standing upright, wings spread, positioned directly between the dragon squad and the small human boy. Master? Drake's voice carried disbelief. He'd clearly expected to find a corpse, not his former teacher standing in a protective stance. What are you doing? Exactly what it looks like, Ash replied. His voice was stronger than it had been in years, powered by something he'd forgotten existed, purpose. Drake's eyes moved to Tommy, then back to Ash. You defend a human? A prey species? The words came out confused, like Drake was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. He is under my protection, Ash declared simply. The 6 warriors behind Drake shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd expected either. One of them, a young green-scaled female, looked genuinely confused. But Master Ash, you taught us. I know what I taught. Ash cut her off. I taught you that strength is everything. That power is the only thing that matters. That showing mercy is weakness and caring about others makes you vulnerable. Drake took a step forward, his claws digging deep grooves in the rocky ground. Yes. You taught us those things because they are true. You're the greatest warrior our species has ever known. You've conquered more worlds than any dragon in history. And you said compassion is weakness. Tommy was standing very still beside Ash's leg, looking up at the 7 dragons surrounding them. The boy had to be terrified, any sane human would be. But his voice was steady when he spoke. He's not weak. He's the strongest person I've ever met. Be silent, pray, Drake snapped, not even looking at Tommy. To dragons, humans weren't worth direct attention. Don't speak to him that way, Ash growled, and there was real anger in his voice now. The kind of anger that had once made armies retreat. You will treat him with respect. Drake looked like someone had just told him that up was down and left was right. Master, what has happened to you? This human child has done something to you. Poisoned your mind somehow. This is exactly why we eliminated Soulfire. This is why connection is dangerous. Ash looked at Tommy, at this small human boy who'd shown him more genuine kindness in a few days than he'd received in 10,000 years of conquest. Then he looked back at Drake, at his former student, at the representative of everything dragons had become. I was wrong, Ash said quietly. Our entire species has been wrong for thousands of years. No. Drake's voice shook. No, you can't. Real strength isn't the power to destroy, Ash continued. It's the courage to connect. To be vulnerable. To choose mercy when every instinct screams for violence. To reach out a hand when logic says you should make a fist. He gestured to Tommy with one massive claw. These humans, whom we call weak, whom we treat as prey, possess something we lost long ago. They have the strength to care about others even when it hurts them. The strength to forgive even when they have every right to hate. The strength to offer kindness to their enemies. That's insanity. Drake roared. That's suicide for a species. You're talking about emotions, about feelings, about caring. Those things get you killed. No, Ash said firmly. Those things make you alive. We're not living, Drake. We're just existing. Moving from one conquest to the next, one battle to the next, one victory to the next. But we're empty inside. We've been empty for so long that we've forgotten what being full feels like. Tommy's small hand rested on Ash's leg. The boy wasn't saying anything, but his presence said everything. Drake looked at his former master, then at the human child, then back again. High Command has given orders. If you refuse to honor the code, if you choose this weakness, then I have to enforce their will. I don't want to fight you, Master. But I will if I must. Ash spread his wings fully. They still trembled, but they were strong enough. Then you'll have to fight me. Because I'm choosing what's right over what I was taught. I'm choosing this boy's friendship over 10,000 years of tradition. I'm choosing to care, Drake. And yes, maybe that makes me vulnerable. Maybe that makes me weak by dragon standards. He looked down at Tommy and felt something warm spread through his chest. Something that had no name in dragon language but made perfect sense in human terms. But I'd rather be weak and alive than strong and empty. The 7 dragons tensed, ready for battle. Tommy squeezed Ash's leg tighter. And in that moment, everything hung in the balance. The old way versus something new, power versus connection, loneliness versus belonging. The choice that would change everything came down to this. Would strength mean destroying, or would it mean protecting? Ash had made his decision. Now he just had to survive it. Part 5. The Heartfire rekindled. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Drake and his warriors surrounded Ash and Tommy, weapons ready but not attacking. Drake kept trying to talk sense into his former master, kept trying to make him see reason. But Ash wouldn't move. Wouldn't back down. Wouldn't abandon the boy. Finally, Drake did something unexpected. He ordered his squad to stand down and contacted High Command directly, demanding they speak with Ash themselves. What happened next shocked every dragon listening to the transmission. Ash formally requested asylum. With humanity. The species he'd spent centuries fighting against. The request hit the galactic news networks within hours. The legendary Deathwing, the dragon who destroyed more human settlements than any other, was asking humans to protect him from his own kind. It was absurd. Impossible. Insane. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. Representatives from 200 species gathered to debate what this meant. Most thought it was a trap, some elaborate dragon scheme. Others thought Ash had simply lost his mind from age. A few thought it was the greatest diplomatic disaster in modern history. But the question everyone kept asking was simple: what would humanity do? The smart move was obvious: refuse. Send Ash back to his people. Don't get involved in dragon politics. Humanity was already the weakest species on the council. They didn't need to make enemies of the most powerful. Every military advisor told the human delegation to say no. Every politician warned about the consequences. Every strategist calculated the risks and said it wasn't worth it. But then they asked Tommy. They asked the 8-year-old boy whose parents had been killed by the dragon seeking protection. They asked him what he thought humanity should do. Tommy's answer was simple: he's my friend. We help our friends. And humanity, in their characteristic defiance of cold logic, said yes. The galaxy couldn't believe it. Humans had just granted asylum to their greatest enemy. It made no strategic sense. No political sense. No logical sense at all. But it made human sense. And that was different. Grace became Ash's official liaison. The grandmother who'd raised Tommy after his parents died, who taught him that hate only burns the one carrying it, now found herself as the bridge between humanity and a 10,000-year-old dragon. She approached it the same way she approached everything, with practical kindness and homemade cornbread. "You're too skinny," she told Ash on their first official meeting. "Dragon or not, nobody should be that skinny. We're fixing that." Ash discovered that human grandmothers were a force of nature more terrifying than any weapon. The dragon began teaching at the human colony. Not military tactics or battle strategies, peace. Understanding. History that his own species had forgotten. He talked about the ancient days, about soulfire, about what dragons had lost in their pursuit of power. Young humans listened, fascinated. But more surprisingly, young dragons started listening too. It started with just a few. Dragon youth who'd heard rumors about their former general, who were curious about the emotions their elders had always dismissed as weakness. They came in secret at first, hiding their attendance, afraid of being labeled traitors. Ash taught them about soulfire. About connection. About the strength it took to be vulnerable. He taught them the things that had been deliberately bred out of their species, the feelings that had no names in dragon language. One young dragon, barely 50 years old, asked a question that would echo through history: "Why does my chest hurt when I think about my clutchmate who died in battle?" Ash looked at this young warrior trying to describe grief without having words for it, and he gave the answer that changed everything: because you love them. And love means their absence creates a space inside you. That pain is proof that the connection was real. The young dragon stared at him. "We have a word for love." "No," Ash said gently. "But humans do. And maybe it's time we learned it." Some older dragons called Ash a traitor. They said he was corrupting their youth, making them weak, destroying everything dragon culture stood for. They demanded the High Command execute him for his crimes against their species. But other dragons, more every day, felt something stirring inside them. Emotions they'd been taught to suppress were bubbling to the surface. They didn't have words for these feelings in their own language, but they recognized them in human terms. Joy. Sadness. Love. Loneliness. Hope. 1 year after Tommy first touched Ash's claw, everything had changed. Ash's scales had returned to brilliant crimson, not from violence, but from purpose. His wings were strong again. His body had healed in ways that made no medical sense but perfect emotional sense. Connection had literally saved his life. The Galactic Council called a special session to address what they were calling the dragon situation. Ash was invited to speak. Tommy insisted on coming with him. Standing before representatives from 200 species, Ash delivered a speech that would be taught in schools for generations. "For 10,000 years, I believed strength meant the power to destroy. I conquered worlds because I could. I burned cities because I was strong enough to do it. I thought caring about others was weakness. I thought emotions made you vulnerable. I thought connection was a liability." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I was wrong about everything. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or their tactics. It was their belief that even enemies can become family. They taught me that the strongest fire doesn't destroy, it warms. It brings life. It connects. Ash looked at Tommy, standing beside him without fear. That's why humanity will outlast every empire in this galaxy. Not because they are physically stronger or technologically superior, but because they understand what true strength means. They know that caring for someone, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it makes no logical sense, that's the strongest thing anyone can do. The chamber was silent. 200 species processed what they just heard. Tommy reached up and took Ash's claw in his small hand. The boy who'd lost everything to a dragon's fire. The dragon who'd chosen a child's hand over a warrior's death. You're still my friend, Tommy said simply. And Ash, who'd lived 10,000 years without crying because dragons didn't have tears, felt moisture forming in his eyes for the first time ever. Humanity hadn't conquered through force. They'd won through something far more powerful, the simple act of reaching out a hand and saying you matter. That changed everything.